Guys, so for a long time, I really struggled as to why, like Mbeki actually argued in my last video, that up to 50.6% of South Africa's households are on SASA. And I used to struggle as to why. I know unemployment plays a huge role in that. But in the last SONA debates, I saw, and I'll be making a video on that anyway, the DA's chief whip, Mikalakis, actually really angry, I think, with an ANC member who actually tried to, I think in his speech, he was actually trying to kind of like ask South Africans, or probably those, I don't know if probably this is those on SASA, you know, that they've been encouraged to make more babies, and the more babies they make, they usually get support and all of that. And so from that perspective, Mikalakis was so angry with that speech. I'll be making that video anyway, and actually slammed him actually in parliament, you know, for encouraging South Africans, especially the women, to probably have more babies, because those babies will be taken care of by, you know, these grants. And so this whole grant mentality, if you remember on this channel, actually I've been speaking a lot about it, and actually arguing on how Gaten McKenzie argues that these grants in South Africa have made South Africans in a way unable to dream, because they feel that there's a kind of like dependence. 350 rand, which when I convert to the currency I know very well in euros, it's 17 euros. 17 euros sometimes when I walk across the streets of Norway or Denmark, or maybe when I travel to Germany, 17 euros could actually get you probably just a few groceries, especially now with inflation, you know, if a few groceries, so to speak, like I could maybe last you for some days, 3, 4, 5 days, or if you're really tight on your budget, at most 1 week and a few days, and that's gone. But it's not something that it's kind of like a scene like should carry someone for 30 days, a whole month. But this is how, in a way, I actually, and I've been seeing a lot of black people with video. Black South Africans are beginning to kind of like wake the people up and actually arguing that more productivity is needed. It appears that this whole grant thing makes people so lazy, and at the end of the day, when they get the grant money or something, they end up kind of like almost squandering it all on alcohol, and there's no production in the land. And many of you actually think that, you know, this channel is actually a way to kind of like be in a way be negative on South Africa. But no, for me, I'm an Africanist, all right? That's first. Most times I usually think that if there were no nations, I would be what they call a continentalist, all right? So the health of the African continent for me is extremely important. And you see, when we go through the research in the papers, we see that South Africa has, it says that South Africa has, I don't know if probably it might be dropping now, but it has still the highest GDP in Africa. And do you know what makes that happen? Why that happens? It's because of business. South Africans have, you know, really fine businessmen. Amidst other factors anyway, just not business, but there are other things involved that make South Africa, you know, have a high capacity for productivity. GDP means gross domestic product, all right? The amount of goods and services that's being produced in cumulative, you know, in a cumulation, so to speak, within a state, all right? South Africa has the highest, and to have Africa lose that, you know, it's actually really detrimental in a way for me, because South Africa is kind of like a pride for most of us who are Africanists, you see. And so that's why it's really sensitive when I try to speak about these issues in South Africa that might end up, you know, jeopardizing productivity in South Africa here or there. I'm really passionate about South Africa. And so in this video now, Mbeki is actually arguing that, you know, it appears that the ANC has lost interest for the poor. All right. I saw that there was a video I posted on this channel where Prince Mashele argued that the whites, you know, have jobs, have kind of like better living than the rest. And I saw many of you in the comments arguing that there are many white squatter camps in South Africa. I saw also those videos on YouTube where there were these guys who actually went to the white squatter camps. It was really surprising for me also to see whites in squatter camps in Africa. But this is a reality. And this is why I actually created this channel, because many West Africans do not know Africa. Many times when we argue that, you know, South Africa has the highest GDP in South Africa, or probably one of the best economies in Africa, many people do not understand, especially in West Africa and East Africa, these other places, do not understand the realities of how those figures have come to be. And that's why Kwazem is here to really educate and bring to the open most of these issues going on. So Mbeki argues that the ANC seems to have lost interest in the poor, and I'll be making another video also where Rob Hossev actually argues that the ANC strategies for a long time has always been to kind of like keep the poor, this kind of like people below the middle class, dependent, so that they can give them votes. I always struggle to understand that concept, because it's a really strange political concept on how people can be kept dependent so that votes can be milked out. But anyway, that's Rob Hersov. Rob Hersov actually give that. I'll be making a video on that where he has an interview with Alec Hawke as well. But if that's really true, that the ANC tries to keep these people who probably we might not call middle class, but probably a little bit below class and, you know, the poor in South Africa, dependent on Grant and SASA so that they can give their votes, and probably this might have been how the ANC has maintained its majority, but now it's going into a slope. Mbeki here in this video is arguing that this purported 2% VAT that was almost kind of like passed, so to speak, or probably presented in the parliament, was in a way sort of like, he calls it sort of like a low key, if I'm reading him correctly, and you hear this yourself, sort of like a way to finish off this base, because this base actually has always been the source for their votes, all right? But now that their votes slumped below 50% in these last elections, it appears that the ANC feels like they do not need this vote. There's a changing of the strategy. The strategy seems to be changing, and so whatever it is that can be passed that harms this particular group of people, the poor in South Africa, really doesn't matter anymore to the ANC. It appears that the ANC's focus is now a little bit more on the middle class. So he actually gives this really intelligent analysis that makes me, sometimes I'm really thinking. There was a way he argued that it says that this 2% VAT was supposed to be sort of like a payback for votes, all right? And he actually also argues that the VAT was intended, or if it's actually implemented, it will finish off the poor in South Africa, and that the ANC has actually historically seen the poor as milk to target. But now, you know, with them losing the majority, I think there's a changing of the strategy. And so no kind of like empathy, so to speak, exists much for the poor. And I've been seeing a lot of black podcasters in South Africa also springing up and arguing that, you know, does ANC hates the poor? The ANC hasn't been, kind of like hasn't had empathy for the poor. And I really struggled. I'm not in South Africa, you know, I'm studying this whole thing from outside. I'm a researcher in South Africa. I conduct and write papers in South Africa, and that's what I do. So for me, all of this is ethnographical knowledge, trying to really understand what makes sense of it, but at the same time, bringing out the issues, in South Africa to the world for people to really understand, you know, South Africa, especially West Africans or East Africans or even Central Africans. We don't know South Africa. South Africa is a really important case that needs to be studied. Okay, and so Mbeki actually finalizes this video as he argues. I think you guys will listen. He actually argues that the DA seems to have won this battle this time. You know, with John Steenhuisen and the likes in the DA who actually stood up to their feet to really, you know, kind of like fight against this 2% VAT increase, and argues that if you listen to this interview with Clement, it appears that it's established by both of them that this might be a leverage for the DA to start fighting against most of the other bills it doesn't support as member of the GNU. But the likes of Gaten McKenzie actually praises the GNU, arguing that the GNU is the only source, fight that can fight against Zuma, and that Zuma is actually preparing to come back to revenge, but only the GNU can stop Zuma. And so he's actually also trying to not allow the GNU members to keep on this fight between themselves, and it's just all a mess. But anyway, the most important thing is that what we will get here, I think Mbeki is actually arguing that the ANC seems to have lost interest in protecting the poor, and that's really striking, because this poor we're talking about is not only the whites, but we also have whites. It's not only the blacks, but we also have white poor, we have Indian poor, we have colored poor. When you listen to Gaten McKenzie speak about the poor among the colored, bro, it's crazy. And so to lose interest in this portion of society that might, in a way, seem to be majority, I don't think that's smart. I don't think that's probably advisable. But anyway, let's quickly listen to Mbeki break down these elements, fact by fact, precept upon precept, on how he thinks and believes that the ANC has lost interest in protecting the poor in South Africa. And share your thoughts in the comments.
The ANC was pro-poor. It is no longer pro-poor. It's pro-middle class. That's why we have those huge salaries that are being paid to the middle class in the public sector. It's no longer pro-poor. That's why it can casually impose a huge cost on the poor. Because remember, who has taken the ANC from being a majority party to being a minority party? It's the poor who have abandoned it, who have stopped voting for it. So the ANC doesn't see the poor as its constituency anymore because they feel the poor, especially the African and colored poor, they don't see them as their constituency because they are no longer voting for them.
Isn't where the ANC's support has been vulnerable in the suburbs, like in the middle class? I would have imagined on the ground, in the far-flung areas, in the rural areas, that's where they still maintain some significant support.
Yes, they have support in the ANC has support in the rural area. But it is losing support in the very most important part of our society, which are the African working class in the metros. That's where the majority of the population of South Africa is. And that's where it is losing. Why is it losing support? Because it's allowing the economy to deindustrialize. So for the working class in the metros, they see unemployment rising. They see the economy stagnating. They don't see a future for their children. They see us importing more and more of what used to be made in South Africa. So it's their jobs that are now being thrown overboard, that are being sacrificed. And that's who is stopping to vote for the ANC. And the ANC, that's why the ANC can impose the extra VAT on them, because they're saying these guys are no longer voting for us. Why should we look after them? Let's tax them to make up the difference that we want.
Why do you think they're not considering corporate tax? And of course, the finance minister will give reasons around the fear that once you target corporate tax, companies also somehow respond. That's going to have an impact on our high levels of unemployment because some are going to shut down, some are going to cut off on some employees. Was that a viable option for the ANC as well?
Well, the finance minister explained yesterday that it's not a viable option because it depends on the profitability of the companies. If companies are not making a profit, then you can't tax a profit that doesn't exist. So he was saying that's not a reliable tax. That's why he goes for a consumption tax, because we all have to consume. We have to consume something, we have to consume bread, we have to buy petrol and so on. So he goes for those which you can't remove from your budget. Then he is. But for the poor people, they are the ones where consumption is a much higher part of their budget than for the middle class. So that's who gets hit the most by VAT.
What do you think this moment means for the African National Congress? I said earlier during my comment that it's almost like a reality check for them, because you almost feel like over the last couple of months they still believed that they're still in charge and they are the majority. I mean, you see it in how sometimes they just push on things without consultation, even in the GNU. What do you think what happened yesterday means for them? Do you think they are waking up to the reality that we're not in charge? We're actually here to co-govern with other parties that we need and that we need to talk to like equal partners?
Well, I think the ANC, at least the leadership, they knew they couldn't elect the president, the deputy president, and the speaker of the National Assembly without the DA vote. So they knew they couldn't govern on their own. But they thought they could outmaneuver the DA, which to some extent they did outmaneuver it. But you know, you can only achieve so much through outmaneuvering, because then the guy you are outmaneuvering gets smart, but from your own tricks, he learns your own tricks. And that's what has happened with the ANC, is that the DA has learned the ANC's tricks, so now you have checkmate between the two of them. And the ANC has got a hugely embarrassing situation where this is a big international story where it cannot give its own budget.
Well, the president said, you know, the GNU is not really fragile. Don't see this as a crisis. This is a sign of a maturing democracy. Like in any other coalition, there will be disagreements, and he says this is one of those, and we'll get over it.
No, I'm sure. I don't see it as a threat to the GNU. I see it as telling the country a lot of messages about the ANC. It's not a threat to the GNU. The fact that they were vetoed is not that they have to learn to live with it. They have to negotiate. But what it is telling us is that the ANC now sees the low-income sections of our population as a target to milk. They are no longer interested in protecting that part of the community. They are now going to milk that part of our society to pay for this hugely inflated state, which really benefits the middle class more than anyone else.
And yet they don't touch on what benefits them as I mean, you look at the ministerial handbook and the benefits that are afforded to ministers. They're not even touching that. And I wonder how, and to your point, how does that read to the poorest of the poor who are going to be affected by VAT? And I mean, let's be honest, how are the ministers going to be affected by the VAT increase? Do they even buy their own groceries? When we pay for their housing, we pay for their transportation, we pay for their petrol. So do they really feel the effect of these taxes they want to impose?
Well, I think the message which is gradually sinking in is that the old alliance of the elite, the black elite, the middle class, the Africans, the colors, the Indians, and so on, to fight against apartheid, that has collapsed. What we are now seeing collapsing further is the African component of this alliance. The middle class are looking after themselves through the agency of the ANC. They are allowing our industrial infrastructure, our logistics infrastructure to collapse, because if you are going to look after the railways and maintain the railways, it means that you have to reduce the income of this middle class that is employed by the state. So they would rather pay these high salaries to the top end of the guys who run the railways rather than maintain the railways. But that has huge impact on the levels of employment for the ordinary working class, for the ordinary black working class in South Africa. But there is a parting of ways. I think this is what yesterday is telling us. There's a parting of ways between that big coalition that developed in the 50s, in the 60s, 70s, 80s of the African working class and the African middle class to fight against apartheid. Now it's everyone for themselves. So the middle class are using their political power to look after their economic interests, and they're saying, sorry to you guys, you have to fend for yourself.
Yeah, and just lastly, you said this was checkmate yesterday between the ANC and the DA. What do you think this moment means for the DA? Because it looks like for now they seem to have won the so-called PR war, so to speak, using this as leverage. And I wonder to what extent they're going to use this moment to also negotiate other things in the GNU, so that it's not just about, yes, we agree or not, but they try and say, also take into consideration what else we've been shouting at you about, but you've been ignoring. What do you think this moment means for the Democratic line?
I think they feel very emboldened. I'm sure they were terrified of vetoing the ANC's budget, but they did it, and the heavens didn't fall in, so they'll do it again next time with something else. So I think the DA feels very emboldened, and they will veto something else next time. Of course, we don't want instability in the South African government. We have a lot more problems than, Bella, the Bella bill and so on. So we don't want conflict in our body politics. And that's what the DA has to be aware of, that it may be angry with the ANC about one thing or the other, but the stability, the political stability of the country overrides almost everything else. Because we saw in July 2021 what happens when you trigger instability in the country. Hundreds of people get killed overnight, literally. So we don't want political instability. So the kind of trials of strength between the DA and the ANC in the government of national unity has to have a limit, that the limit is not triggering instability.
They must know when to do it.
They have to know when to stop. Yeah. They have to know when to stop.
Mbeki, political economist, thank you so much for making time for us. Thank you for helping us make sense of what happened yesterday.